So we're an association, foundation, and meeting management company out of Arlington, Virginia. And we work with a lot of nonprofit educational associations, and also we're very focused on the religious market as well. Should we kind of go through the 5-minute?
The what?
The presentation to...
Hold on to your trends.
Questions. I'm Karen Fitzgerald. I'm with the International Association of Fire Chiefs. We represent fire and emergency services around the country. And actually, I'm learning a lot about it. It's volunteer and career. And we have a trade show and then a bunch of smaller meetings. And some of what I'll refer to will also be going back to the American Bakers Association, where I was not too long ago. I've been with IAFC for 6 months. So I have more fresh on the brain actually with my old association because I was more directly involved with the meetings there.
Good afternoon, everyone. Greg Talley with Talley Management Group. We're an association and convention management company and do events, everything from small associations to 50,000 people, citywide events.
All right. So we're going to talk about some trends, some things that these meeting professionals are seeing in the industry, and how they may apply to what you're doing. And I'm going to actually start with Karen in the middle.
Great.
Share with us a trend or two, or what you see trends in the meetings industry that might be applicable to these folks.
Okay. Well, fortunately, it looks like the industry is coming back as far as meetings. I've seen very mixed things, though. As far as attendees, we're seeing companies send less people from the same company. We're seeing very mixed things in exhibits where a lot of exhibitors are downsizing their booths or they're sending less representatives to shows. They don't seem to be dropping off as far as participation, though they do definitely see the value there. We've seen more of a downsize where I am now with the fire chiefs in terms of size because we have big apparatus, the fire trucks, ambulances, and that has come down drastically in the last several years. So our space is really shrinking and the number of attendees is staying about the same. We're also seeing, which is...
Karen, can I stop you for just
Sure.
a second? I thought it was interesting. I heard two things there. Some companies sending less attendees, but attendance about the same. And then I heard something that less exhibit space, but not less participation. Did you catch that? And I'm going to ask if Ryan, you or Greg have anything you would throw in on that piece about exhibits and trade shows. Have you seen similar things?
Yeah, yes, but I think the concern is, are they spending the same amount of money in how they're doing their usage? And I think that's all over the board. Some I think actually are, and they're just reapportioning it differently. Others are not, and I think that's something we're all still trying to figure out. So overall, we're seeing a decline in ICW activity, but yet we're also seeing others say, okay, we're going to take that money that we would have spent on your exhibit floor, and now we want to do something else with it. Tell us how to do that.
I'm going to do something else with the money.
Yeah, and just to take it a step further, what we're finding, especially being here in DC and in the federal things on Capitol Hill that are affecting attendance, the sequester, the limitations on travel with the government. Many of our organizations that we handle, to be very honest with you, are going through some tough times as far as participation. And I don't want to be too specific as far as organizations, but a lot of the exhibitors have federal support and funding for participation, and when a lot of these funds are cut off, all of a sudden they have 30% less exhibitors. It affects their attendance, and these meetings have a kind of a negative attendance model going forward.
So I was just going to jump in. The government's been a big issue for us with fire chiefs. In fact, we had at our show last August, we were down about $500,000 because of DOD not being able to attend.
Okay. And to take that a step further, we have a client that has had a meeting for 17 straight years. It's 2,200 rooms over peak. It's like clockwork, and last year they were 30 days prior to going into Phoenix, to be very honest with you, with their meeting, and had to cancel because a lot of the branches of the service didn't get approval to participate, like DOD. Yeah. So we have a lot of organizations like that where, certainly we don't want to ever have to cancel the meeting, but the participation is definitely going down.
So two things here, government impact going on. And also back to the exhibitors piece, may be spending less money on space, but they're spending money elsewhere at the meeting. A trend that we're seeing at Velvet Chainsaw is actually that exhibitors are trying to position themselves as thought leaders. And so suddenly they're sponsoring and underwriting education tracks for speakers because they want to be seen as being helpful to the industry. So what I'd like for you to do at your tables right now, and here's the way it's going to work. They're going to share some ideas, they'll talk about it up here, then I'm going to pitch it back to you, and I want you to discuss it at your table. How do you see government impacting some of the meetings that might be coming up for you? And then also, what are some things that you're seeing exhibitors do if they're spending less on space? And how can you help your clients in that arena if they come to you and say they're not willing to spend the money here? What could you do to help them? Talk about that at your tables for just a few minutes. All right, let's talk about this as a group. So I listened to a couple tables, and I'm in the back of the room now if you're looking for me. Debbie, would you mind sharing with everybody what you just shared at your table? Here's one way to help your potential clients.
Hi, I'm in Phoenix, and we, of course, lost him. But that's okay, not your fault. We were all shocked. One of the things that we've been doing with some of our clients, and to your point about exhibit space and what's happening if it's shrinking, because we'll look at history with clients, and 2 years ago they might have needed 250,000 square feet, and now you see that they might need 100,000, but then they want us to bid on 250, 300,000 square feet. And what we've done to help some of our clients is if they're really not sure, we're telling them, we'll give them what we think they're going to actually use, and we'll bid on that, give them a first right of refusal for some space that we can agree to hold for a period of time. But if another client is asking for it a year out from now, then they're going to either have to fish or cut bait and make that decision. That way we're not charging them and contracting it only for them to come back and say, you know what, I really can't use that space. So then we're put in the position of, well, we really got to charge you a cancellation penalty because we turned down other business in the meantime. So it seems to be working to do that, work with them, hold it, then let them make the decision.
Where's the threshold on timing, though? About how far out does that work or not work?
If you think that, well, it depends on how far out. If you're booking for 2020, then we probably give you some leeway. We don't normally necessarily contract that far out anyway. But if you're coming in, if we're looking at 2016 and it's now 2013, by the time we get a contract signed, it's going to be a year and a half out, 2 years out. We probably would have turned down some business in the meantime.
I think that's a creative way to address, making sure the costs are right, especially with a group that may be going, down in pickup. But you have to be careful because, an organization has a lot of hopes that over time they're going to get that conference back to where it wants to be. And if they feel like there's a chance that they might not have the space there at the end of the day, if they have to make a decision 2 years after they book it and their meeting's 5 or 6 years out, that they might not commit to that destination because of that proposal. But there has to be some give and take, and we're in a unique situation here in circumstances where you have to be creative to be able to, one, come in, and this is where, and I wanted to make a point about how there's a lot of bureau representatives here, and there's a lot of center representatives here, and how a destination, how a bureau, and how a center needs to work closer together to make sure, one, they take a look at the potential piece of business, know the value of it, not only with sleeping rooms and exhibit space, but also the value to the city, and also to be very creative through discounts from the center or contributions from the bureau or discounted hotel room rates that are inclusive of rebates, to financially being offered a aggressive deal to get them on, the books, and also be in a position to earn the business. Because I was telling Greg and Karen that, and I know you hate to hear it, and everybody wants to make money, and but we just came out of 2008, 9, and 10 that was historic. Obama saying don't go to Las Vegas. Biden saying don't go on a plane. Roger Dow, Bill Marriott went on Capitol Hill, turned them around, explaining, listen, 10 million people's jobs are on the line. And we were kind of coming in an upswing, but let me tell you, this federal issue, budget cuts, and you know, everything that's kind of looming now has put us right back in a nosedive, and we really have to all work together to make sure, one, we can book business the way it should be, and two, and this is as a third party talking, but at the same time get some preferred deals for our clients where everybody wins. So this is great to have a forum like this to discuss these type of things and see what kind of ideas we can bring up.
I think the longer term challenge is I really don't know who could estimate today what their event's going to look like 5 years from now. I don't know how you do it. So I think that represents an even bigger challenge for us as an industry, in that we kind of all come in real relearning, right? We used to know not to worry. There were people booking themselves 15, 20 years in advance based on the same set of specs or some sense of escalation. That's all gone. Look at the industries that have completely turned on their heads over the course of the last 8 to 10 years for a variety of reasons. And I look at my clients and I think they'd be nuts to go that far out in advance, and you'd be nuts to book them. Because how do we know what that's going to be like? How do we figure what that value is going to represent in that period of time? I think it's a real challenge for us.
I think that's a real good point, though, is that both sides need to make sure they're not contracting, because it's not even, and if you get a cancellation, if you're a hotel or a convention center, you know, you would rather have the real business there than getting cancellation fees, because you're not making as much money either. So it's got to be good for both sides.
How do you guys feel about that? Here they are talking to you about that. This is your business. They're asking you to partner better, and they're asking you not to consider booking out that far. Do you have some questions for them or some response to them? You gonna let them say that to you?
I guess my question is in this series, we've been talking about trends, and basically the trend is that there are no trends. In the downfall of 2008, all the hotels and convention centers that were sitting on corporate business basically flatlined, and everybody said, oh, well, you should have had a government base. Now we're looking at March and saying, boy, I hope you don't have a government base because nobody knows where they're going. So, and that's within a 5-year period that you're talking, or 6-year period that you're talking about trends that aren't trends anymore, and nobody really has a clear view of what to talk about or to even trend. I went to a trade show, I won't mention their names, but they were recording that in 2011 was one of their best years. They did $800 million plus. 80% of it was booked in the year for the year. We saw trends of large associations and conventions that usually had a 3 to 5 year booking window going down to within, you know, a year. So that's what we were discussing here, that, you know, how do you react to that?
Right, so the whole issue of risk mitigation is what our jobs have turned into.
Correct.
So to a large degree, that's what it's all about. It's managing a client risk. So how can you look at putting something on the books or obligating yourself to something of the significance of a major event in a major city when it just might all change or change enough that has a huge impact on that? So risk mitigation is driving this.
Yeah, correct.
So who else wants to have a response to them? Anybody else? Or a response to what Mark said here? So how do you handle this? If there are no trends, what are you doing?
I was just going to say that that short-term window is really becoming critical.
Debbie, let me give you the mic so we can all hear you.
Well, because what we're finding, and it's why we're working with our clients to try to say, don't necessarily make that commitment because we don't want to put you in that position. But we've got major corporations now that are not going to book anything until like a year out. And then they don't understand why we can't give them 175,000 square feet of exhibit space. It's like, well, where are you going to find that anywhere, you know, within like a year? So to Brian's point, are you giving up business that you want to go ahead and get on the books? But at the same time, you know, we're looking financially at what could we have gotten who maybe had more room nights because they're booking at the, you know, on a later pattern. So I don't know. The trends are, I don't know where they're going.
Well, I think if you book to history, I think there's a lot of responsibility, Greg, on our part to book to history, I mean, if you're working with an organization, it's a blue chip association, and you know the people there, and they're very, you know, visible in the industry, and it's everybody's target, whatever brand or city you may be at. But the groups that we're lucky enough to be able to represent out in the industry, you know, we've always tried to do the best we can, and it's even more important now than ever, is to, and we're in strategic meetings with them every quarter. We know the health of the organization, if they're starting to trend down or trend up. if we're booking a meeting in 2020, as you mentioned, you can bet in 13 and 14 and 15 is, the booking paces, the history, the spend, talking to their exhibit managers, how the trends of exhibits being committed to, how sponsorship. We're going to share that with you so we can tweak space all the way up to when that meeting's going to happen. And if, it might take maybe 2 years to see a trend where we can say, listen, we're not going to need 50,000 square feet of space, and we're going to be taking over, we're going to be releasing these 2 overflow hotels. So at least the base business, you can call it, which you need a lot of that, because when 5 years ago, when that corporate flatline, and it's funny because we've always been heavy in the religious market, so we've always thought religious is great and government's great, and it used to be corporations and then incentives and then associations and then government and then religious. It just went absolutely upside down, and 5 years later now, government is history, is moving back down to the bottom of the list. So I think management, I think Greg said it's not only liability related and making sure the liability that these associations are willing to commit to or in these agreements that allow them to move forward and commit to a city, but beyond that, it's managing the association, managing blocks, giving you the information you need to make decisions after meetings are booked in regards to releasing space and being able to put business on top of that.
So business has changed the way it was 10 years ago, correct?
Yeah, we're all redoing all of our contracts.
Right.
I mean, renegotiating them all the time, which will be interesting to say, and please do not ever quote me that you heard it here, but I think that one thing that we may start seeing with third parties is, I think fees are gonna have to start going up. I mean, because I think you guys, anybody that works for a third party, I know, but it's like, it's a scary part. Because I know, well, after 9/11, everybody had to redo all of their contracts, and so you're doing the same amount of work, maybe not exactly the same, not double the work, but let's say you're doing, 170% of the work for a contract, and you're gonna get, and actually a lot of them were making less money because it was based on the roof.
Well, yeah, not only are we renegotiating 3 times, but it's now half the size of what it was when we first booked it.
So that's
here's what I
gonna
hear.
be something to watch.
Here's what I hear for you. Be nimble. We're looking for nimble players with us. And we're looking for players who will adapt quickly with us. Because you're our partners. That's what I'm hearing up here. Does that make sense? And if you'll tell us you'll be nimble and adapt quickly, you're more likely to get our business.
Definitely.
Right?
Yes.
Absolutely.
And then adapting exactly to the point of that, Brian brought up a great point of centers, bureaus, everybody, hotels, all working collectively and collaborative. Transparency absolutely is key. And while our booking paces, are 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, 6 months out to 2020, it has to be the right piece of business. And of course, we need to also, in our industry, as centers or bureaus, to do our homework, whether it's a third-party association of IMN, Tally, whomever, or the actual end user, that's giving us the 6 years history. We have to trend it out and be smart about it. And think about, is this a piece of business that we want today, what they're showing us in an RFP, with the chance it might go up, we'll be all excited about, or it might go down a little bit. But still to be collectively, everybody on the same team is huge. And it's been huge for a long time, but definitely even more now.
Team players, team players.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. It's communication. You have to set up a time.
Hold on, so we can all hear you. Hey, Margie.
I think communication is big. You have to stay in contact with them and set that up at the time too. We need to review it once a year, every 6 months, or however far out you are. If it's 20, once a year, just to make sure everything's the same and you're taking the temperature of what you're holding.
Okay. Along the same trends of the exhibit space, the exhibitors might not be using as much space. I'm seeing education move to the exhibit hall. Right?
Well, I think the entire thing about space usage is changing tremendously. And I think that's, the other challenge is going to be, I think we're trying to get a lot more creative in looking at our event management and our event planning to make it more of an experiential type of activity, more relevant to the attendees, and that has all sorts of implications for space and all the wrong way, because it generally means more, not less. And that's where I think we're going to continue to get into a rub, because we're going to be looking at different room sets, we're going to be looking at different ways we're trying to do education, and once again, that's not less, that's more. And so we're headed the wrong way, in terms of what that means in terms of space
But
usage
Greg, tell
and
us why
cost.
we're headed that way. As
Well,
meeting
we're headed that way
professionals.
theoretically to make the event more relevant and a better event for the end user and therefore attract more for a growing dynamic event. So that's the intent.
So did you hear that? The changing meeting space. And two words I picked up: to create an experience and to create something relevant. Not just to schedule a meeting and do a room set and throw people in a room. There's an intentionality here that's happening that I think may not have happened in the past because what worked in the past isn't working today. Right?
And you gotta be
Go
more,
ahead.
you have to have a more creative approach to your meeting. If it's
Creative approach. Wow.
more educational tracks, make it more relevant to somebody that's not gonna be reimbursed to participate, but because of continuing education, or you give enough out there that they haven't experienced before going in years past to justify going this time when money's tight and they're spending their own money for
Or
an
more
example.
unique ways to use the space in
Right.
terms of networking or in terms of what you're going to do with it. So again, all different
Yeah.
in terms of what we're actually trying to do and going to be asking if you can work with us to do.
Karen, are you seeing the same thing?
We are, but when I was thinking during the break when you were talking, when the three of us were talking too, and Greg brought up that, you know, with the one of the big challenges too, particularly with all the government downturn, is that people aren't allowed to travel outside of their state. So that is something that I think will become a trend, is that people want more regional and local education, which totally changes the trade show model. I don't think the trade shows are going to go away. I mean, we heard that when when technology came out. That's not going to go away, but they're definitely changing. But we're already doing it. We're doing smaller hosted buyer programs. But again, we're using a lot of space but it's different. But we're using bigger space, maybe in a hotel, or if there's something available in a convention center. But right now we're using hotels, but we don't have a whole lot of heads and beds. But we're bringing trade shows locally, going around regionally, so.
So did you hear this, that they're going to ask for more space?
When we're trying to cut costs, we're
And trying to cut costs.
What's
And-
the issue? What's the issue?
And they're about creating an experience.
So
There is a big issue.
It's a financial issue for convention center.
Hold on, Debbie, hold on.
Okay. Because I know what you're saying, because we see this now, but here's what happens. Our whole pricing model was based on exhibit space. Because we make money selling the exhibit space that we can give you free meeting rooms. Now, if you're not using the exhibit halls for exhibits, what does that do for us? There's a huge financial implication with that. And we see that happening. It's just that it changes the whole pricing model. And you're saying, well, you need to be flexible, and we understand that, but everybody wants free Wi-Fi everywhere as well, so where do we make the money to cover the infrastructure of maintaining outstanding convention center facilities for people to bring these?
Okay, I want to stop here and let you have a discussion at your tables. Greg, do you have one final comment about this?
No, I'll wait.
Okay. Let's have oh, must be a heavy one. Try to remember that one. Have a discussion at your tables that if we as the meeting professionals are coming to you and asking for more space and we don't want to spend more money, what are you going to do about that? And does anybody have any creative solutions to the financial model that you've been thinking about and talking about where you are? Talk about that at your tables. Okay, let's talk about this as a group.
We've been trying to pack
So, who has something at their table they're willing to share with the rest of the group that you talked about? Concerns, challenges, positives, negatives? Shimo, I've been waiting for you. Okay, Shima's going to tell us what they talked about, or an insight.
Okay, well, we talked about, the fact that on our side of the equation, we don't do a good enough job just capturing some really key data in the first place. So then when we start talking about what is that going to look like, 3, 4, 5, 8, 10, whatever, we are missing some really key information about the demographics of the convention we're dealing with. So for starters, I think that we have to look to each other, look to our own teams, and say to ourselves, what we missing? And we're missing sort of a rev manager for our destinations, almost. Because it's that competency that's going to help our side of the equation better serve the customers as we're dealing with them rotating from destination to destination. But it's almost like we need that skill set, that revenue manager mindset to really start to have some more intelligent conversations about protecting space, balancing the needs of the destination, understanding the attendee better than we ever have before, and what the attendee is spending and what they're doing in the destination, because that's a big missing point. So we're pretty focused on room nights, and I think that is a big fallacy for us today. Focusing on room nights is a dead end, because we're not going to be able to capture it in the traditional sense. But if we look more broadly and really kind of think about different skill sets we need on our side to better serve and better forecast and better understand the events and how they're changing, I think that's the first place we start.
Do all of you agree we could do a better job of collecting data?
Yes.
Yes. And then I would take it a step further. We could do a better job of interpreting our data.
Greg, why don't you mention what we were talking about?
Well, totally agree. I mean, I think I think we've been addicted to crack cocaine on both sides. On both sides.
Can we quote you on that, Greg?
You know, I think for our whole industry basically was addicted to the exhibitor dollars for years and years and years, and guess what? We killed the golden goose collectively. And we're going to have to get over that on both sides. For a lot of us, we did the same thing internally in our organizations. If it wasn't the exhibitors, it was the sponsors, call it who you will, and look at the amount of money they brought into our organizations and what we basically thrived off of. Well, for a lot of organizations, that's changed. Look at you guys. What's your funding model been built on? To a large degree. Same thing, selling that exhibit space and or maximizing the contracted room block peak. That isn't going to work anymore. So you've got to come up with another model on your end, and we've got to come up with other models on our end, I think in terms of pricing as well. I don't think we can continue to go down the road of expecting everything for free.
Does anybody in the room have it? Oh, go ahead.
We still want it, though.
And we're still going to ask.
But I think to follow up on a comment there about, and it was a stretch, but it makes sense, a rev manager for the city to be able to measure a value of a piece of business. We were saying here that we need to do a better job, or the end user, the association needs to know what their meeting is worth. If it's worth $5.4 million and a bureau has to contribute $40,000 towards a $40,000 cost of the center to get a group to commit to that city, guess what? You're going to be happy to have them in there. And that's where sometimes when they're saying we want free, and there's creative ways of doing it where it isn't as bad of a hit to the bottom line, to the center or the bureau. But if you can get a huge piece of business that's going to, and they might have interest in rotating back once they experience a destination, and that's kind of base business you can count on from a blue chip association, there's so many things that come into play about what makes a good business decision. And I think the idea of having a bureau being such a vital part of the booking process, selling the destination, and I have some notes here where I was saying another thing that really is important is keeping facilities and hotels and centers, you know, expanding and updating. I mean, a perfect example here with Greg and Elliot selling this brand new Marriott package here, and if it's Dallas with their new Omni Hotel, or if it's San Jose in September completing their expansion of their convention center, or if it's Nashville opening in 2 months down there with their center and Omni package, you got to have a story to tell, first of all, because you could be doing everything right. You could have a good, aggressive package on the table. The director of meetings is sold for, let's say, Baltimore for just conversation's sake, and the board members that are sitting there disengaged with that process, looking at basic information, may have a negative view on the city for whatever strange reason, and then approve it, and you don't get the business where you've done everything right. So, and that's also branding of a destination. That's part of it as well. You know, there's some great cities that do some great creative, cutting-edge marketing.
And we like those.
And
we like those.
And I'm sure a lot of us sit on some advisory boards of some bureaus and help sometimes through that process. But it's not just dates and then trying to figure out, you know, let's kind of throw this at them and see if we get them. It starts from day one, through the city, through what can be, approved as far as, renovations and expansions, through presenting right, through knowing your client well enough, if it's through a third party, tapping into their knowledge, to presenting something that puts you in the best position to get the business done.
So let me rephrase something he said here, and let me put it to you in another term. From a meeting standpoint, when I plan meetings anymore, I plan them holistically. I don't plan them as the date and time starts here when they walk on the facility. I plan them from the moment, the first touch point, they get hit with an announcement. And I look at it much more holistically and how it connects with everything else the organization is doing. So to put it in your terms, we're looking for CVBs and venues who look at bringing our event and look at it more holistically, our event coming to your city. And the impact, not just heads in beds, but the more holistic impact our meeting can have on your city. Does that make sense? And when we find you playing well together as partners and sitting down with us, that's attractive to us. Because then you're telling us the city wants us. Does that make sense? And then if you're creative enough and you're showing us a little cutting edge and you're showing us how you're keeping up to date, renovations, new properties, that's attractive to us because that'll be attractive to our attendees. Does that make sense? Thoughts, comments, Bonnie?
I just wonder, coming from Charlotte, North Carolina, where we have the DNC, what role local politics and taxing different venues has, because right now one of the issues is raising taxes within Charlotte for Bank of America Stadium for the Panthers, and that's a big brouhaha.
I think that's been talked about a lot over the years, and I wonder how many of our attendees actually look at it from that standpoint. In other words, look at it and say, my God, the bed tax is 19%, I'm not going. I'm just not sure that translates to them. Now, to me as a buyer on a larger scale, it's certainly something we look at, but it all goes into the pot that you're then weighing against who the competitive set's going to be. So I don't know that it's as huge. I guess I resent it as a kind of outsider paying the local bill for what the locals want to have. When I look at it that way, by the same token, I'm from Philadelphia, and thank you all. We got two. Yeah. So, I mean, I get how it all works, but I'm not sure it plays that much into the individual decision to attend an event, what the size of that tax rate is.
Well, I'm talking about the meeting organizer, not necessarily the attendee. I know Roy Evans would not go to New York City when the room taxes were over 20%.
But every time you go to New York, it's the highest attendance you're going to get. So you look at it and say, okay, that was his very principled stand. I'm not sure the rest of the organization would have agreed with him. We want to go to New York. Everybody wants to go to New York. So, it plays both ways.
I agree. I think you're looking at the bigger picture that a specific city, I mean, if everything is equal and the tax rate in one city is that's where the decision making, that might break it. But yeah, you're looking at the whole thing. And I agree, the attendees, they don't know until they get their hotel bill.
Okay. It's true. It's true. Other comments? Other comments about discussions we had? Yes. Sherry?
I have a couple comments. One, when we're talking about rents being low, and I'm at a convention center, as long as it was mentioned, if we have a lot of history, if you don't have that rental and you really are trying to get that group, then if we have at least the ancillary history, maybe it's electric, maybe it's food and beverage, maybe it's parking, something that makes it make sense for us to have it. That's, would be a key thing. And I did want to mention, I was talking, this has been a few years ago, but I was talking with a meeting planner with a very large religious group. And we had the group in Columbus once before, and we wanted to bid on them again. They had paid rent when they were there before. And I said to the meeting planner, where are we at right now? Where do we need to be, rent-wise? And we had some pretty frank conversations, and he said, rent? Why would I pay rent? And I said, well, why wouldn't you? And he said, we are worth $5 million in economic impact. And my bureau person, my counterpart, was there too. And I didn't want to argue the point with the gentleman. He eventually walked away, and I said, he was worth $5 million when he paid a decent room rate when his meals weren't $10 a person and when parking wasn't free. But he was under this understanding that he was worth that. Somebody had said, you have that many people, then the calculation is that you're worth this. And that's what I think we all need to be educated about.
Well, that's a good point. I mean, if it was $5 million, if he paid for parking, if the rate was $159 instead of $99, on and on and on, but it might be $2.9 million, and he still might have the argument that he feels like and it's history. I mean, we also create our own bed per se. I mean, and we do a lot of religious business, and we don't get convention centers comp all the time, but we get very creative to get it very close where they can justify financially to commit to that area. But another good point is to say that, listen, you're going to get it free, but you got to come to the table with something too. What do you usually do in F&B? And a lot of times they don't liability-wise want to commit to it, but if the history shows you do $150,000 in F&B, and you can put that in as a benchmark that they will hit this zero number through whatever calculations and contributions and discounts and whatever you may have, they're the things that we can help you from their side commit to you to have more a win-win, more of a win-win, where maybe there's more revenue guaranteed for the deal you're giving, but still getting this good piece of business that has great history.
Well, this is one of the reasons why I like the DMAI tool so much, is that it gives us kind of a way to really start understanding the value of the business as it changes from city to city. It's why one reason I was in favor for letting the planners have total and complete access to that information, because what might be a great piece of $5 million value in your city might be really a lousy piece of business for Washington, D.C., but the planner, for some reason, might not understand that. So you kind of get into a matrix and say, for your $5 million, if you want X, X, and X, these are going to be the sorts of cities you need to look at, because that's where that $5 million means a lot over that set of dates. These cities, not so much. And you'd think we'd all get that, but you also know that there's a whole group of meeting planners you work with that don't get that. So a tool to kind of help them understand the relative value as they take their meeting around the country, and then be able to show them the relative value of if you move dates, what that does all of a sudden, I just don't think it's computing. So something that can almost go into a matrix and say, let me show you how your $5 million value plugs in our city and what that's worth to us.
I think that would be great, because the other thing too is, there's so much movement within the industry that there may be, I mean, I don't know what the specific example was with that client, but if I'm working for XYZ association, I'm used to this rate or, a hotel rate, or I'm used to paying this much or not paying whatever in a center, but then I go to another association and I'm used to all these, but I don't understand what that new piece of business is. And that's, I think, the challenge, because we go to meetings like this and everybody says, well, why are you paying, you shouldn't be paying for this, you should get this taken out. But it really, it's specific to the industry, it's specific to the city, as you were saying. I mean, there are so many factors, and it's on both sides to show what the value is.
Okay, I'm going to give you guys about 5 more minutes here, and then we're going to switch and let some other people come up and talk to them. Other trends, real quick, that you see happening, share with them.
Certainly technology. I mean, I think the piece of what we talked about here, and I think that plays into the space usage and everything else we were talking about. And then we're all starting to think about how do we use it differently, what can we do with it, what does that mean for our meetings and events, and how that plugs into you, in terms of connectivity and bandwidth, is really becoming the bigger and bigger conversation that we're all having. So
and we're looking for recharge stations.
Yes.
See, another thing is exclusivity of some services in convention centers. I know they're trying to get very creative to get some new revenue streams in, just because of all these issues we're talking about over the last hour. So, which is good, but at the same time, you got to be careful, because after time, some clients can get frustrated. They can't bring in their own AV, or they're going to be shadowed if they do, and there's still going to be higher costs because of the program they might have, and the way they're approaching business at certain cities and certain centers. So that's something that we're all dealing with, is your ideas of some revenue streams, but for then the clients to get more educated on why they're coming at you, and if you have some flexibility where both parties can win, so be it, but they kind of be firm about how certain things have to be, and then finding out they're paying $10 or $20 more for that type of service at the end of the day in that city, in that center, that could be not so good for business for some of the...
Jeff, I think we have to talk about globalization. I don't know an organization that isn't addressing it, and it has an impact on events, it has an impact on what the investment's going to be on new products and services, and a lot of that isn't going to be in North America, not in the U.S. And I think that's got an impact that we've got to be aware of, because, you know, for our organizations, they have got to be looking elsewhere where the growth is going faster, where markets are growing more, and where they need to have a presence, and that has implications.
So that goes back to what Mona shared with us today, trends, where she shared the data about globalization. So think about that. And
unions.
I was going to bring that up. That's a huge issue.
It's a major issue, and I think you know, some cities have done a good job dealing with their union situation.
And some haven't.
You know, if it's Chicago, if it's San Jose that has some, you know, some of their union people on their board, if it's Philly, you know, with Jack Ferguson doing what he needs to do to address things there. I mean, you know, unions are here to stay. Many centers are union, but you have to, in that world, we have a lot of union clients as well, so there's a need for it, but working in that environment with everybody being so cost conscious, there has to be a way that unions work better with centers, and those services are provided to associations and organizations going into
so let's recap some of the trends that they've brought up. Government issues. State meetings may grow, regional meetings may grow for those in the government sector. Changing space of meetings. I think that is huge for all of you, because creative meeting professionals like these three are going to be asking for more space to do creating experience. Technology, obviously. Globalization. I can take one or two questions for them before we switch to the next group. Anybody have one or two questions for these guys? Nobody? All right, give them a hand clap. So, as these gentlemen get their mics on, let me tell you something that I see as a trend. As a meeting planner, meeting professional, I see a trend that meeting professionals are going to start coming to you and asking you for different furniture than what you already have at your venue. They probably maybe already are asking about it. And guys, if y'all come on up. And I will tell you, I know of a venue that actually in their renovations put into their budget to buy all new innovative furniture on wheels to compete against the rest of you, to offer to potential planners, to say, we're thinking ahead, we know what's happening in the office space and in the education space with furniture, and we have it for you here, that you can move around fast and quickly. And there's research that's come out of the design school in Stanford University called there's a book called Make Space that is all about what furniture and space fosters learning and collaboration and what doesn't. You guys should take a look at that, because you're going to have some creative meeting planners like Greg come and say, what can you get me that I don't have to rent from the decorator? So gentlemen, introduce yourselves. Tell them a little bit about yourselves.
You first, please. Okay, fine. I'm Elliot Ferguson. I'm the President and CEO of Destination DC, which is the Convention and Visitors Bureau here in Washington.
And I'm Greg Odell, the President and CEO of Events DC, which is the Convention and Sports Authority here in Washington, DC.
And I think most of you know these two gentlemen, right? So tell us some trends that you guys are seeing. You've heard the conversation this morning, or this afternoon. Tell us what trends you're seeing as well. This looks like a comedy show to me.
All right, I'll start. So I first, of course, in true salesmanship, I would agree with everything our panelists said, since they're all clients of ours. But no, I agree with some of, or much of what was discussed in terms of trends. I would say, though, it's a bit of a mixed bag as it relates to market segmentation. So we talked a lot about the impact of government, and we certainly referenced what happened with the corporate segment. But you know, there are some of our customers, particularly, we are seeing a lot stronger performance in some of the nonprofit world. So I would offer that we are seeing an increase in demand. It's an uptick from certainly where we've been the last couple of years. So I would say that trend is a bit of a mixed bag, and I think hopefully a lot of everyone in the room has also experienced that as well. I can go on and on, but if you want to talk about that.
No,
first.
I mean, you're absolutely right, but it also forces us to do business differently. And that's some of what was said earlier today. I mean, you know, being in DC, the perception is we do a lot of government business, and the reality is we do a lot of government business. But we don't do a lot of government business during our peak periods. So therefore, you know, by design, we have to be diverse in terms of the type of business that we go after. However, you know, we are a membership-based organization like most CVBs, and our members are out there saying to us that we're down 20% because of what's happening with the government. And then that's followed with, what are you going to do about it? And you know, and the reality is, you know, my reaction is, what are you going to do at this late hour? And, you know, perhaps you should look at and focus on what has happened in other destinations, such as, you know, a fantastic city a little further north of Washington that has really focused a lot on the transient business. And then when that fell through, then they didn't have a lot of group business. Never put all your eggs in one basket, and be as diverse as possible, and then continue to challenge the team to go after different markets so that we're not in a position where as we say, okay, well, this market is going, you know, south. We've been there before after 9/11 in Washington, D.C., which is right when I came on board. And so we have that, you know, we remember how it was after 9/11, and we know exactly what's happening with the government market now, and we've got some ideas in terms of filling some gaps. And, you know, hopefully we'll be successful.
So what I heard him say is diversify. Really intentionally diversifying your business. Focusing on that. And then tell us a little bit more about how you're doing business differently.
Well, I mean, from our perspective, and again, you know, our goal is, like most bureaus, is to market the city, the destination, and then listen to the whole list of, you know, freebies that people want. You know,
Wi-Fi?
Well, you know, we've changed the word free into an acronym. I can't share it on mic right now. But you know, there are certain realities in certain destinations.
Can you sign it for us?
Yeah. But there's certain realities in certain destinations, whereas, you know, you almost throw up your hands when someone says, well, we want a free center, and then they say, well, we're competing against second or third tier destinations, and there's nothing against any type of destination, but the reality is, you know, I almost say to the team, well, why don't you just tell the customer, why don't we bid on a year whereas we're competing against a similar destination, which I heard some of the panelists say up here. Because it may, I mean, otherwise, if you're looking for free, we're not going to be free. We're not going to be the cheapest, but then we, you know, granted, we don't say it like that, but that's the reality. But you know, here are some of the things that the benefits of meeting in our destination, and here are some of the positives that the trends in terms of the last few years. Customers have said that their attendance was up, so therefore their profit margin was up. So we look at things differently because we know that our customers are expecting that.
Yeah, and I want to offer, I guess, first, as a first threshold, when we're looking at competitive business, we're going to do all the things that were discussed in this session or during their panel discussion. We're going to make sure that we look at the business holistically. We're going to look at all the revenue streams combined and see where we can help each other. I absolutely agree in partnership. I will say, and we joke amongst the venues that, you know, partnership has been a one-way street as of late in a buyer's market, but, you know, the reality is it has been a buyer's market. There's been a lot more supply out there, and we get that and understand that. But I think, you know, to have a little bit of a deeper dive, I mean, we're in the middle of a perfect storm that's coming right now. And what I mean by that is, you know, there's a spectrum of venues out there that this model is no longer sustainable. They can't keep giving away their building. It's just not going to happen anymore. So whether it's, you know, for us, you either have venues that have very good capital structures that can pay for, you know, basic simple things like operations and then pay for their capital needs, and then you have destinations that aspire to be even more and actually pay for marketing dollars that everyone wants. But then on the other side of that spectrum, you have people who can't even pay their light bills. I mean, there is a convention center in the West Coast right now that has to decide between shutting their building down or actually cutting their budget for parks and recs. I mean, that's how bad and serious it is, and that trend is going to continue. So if anyone thinks that's not the case, you know, we're kidding ourselves. So that's the problem that we have in trying to manage expectations. And I think, as was said with the panels before, we're all searching for certainty. So whether it's, you know, negotiating for guarantees or somehow we can play with the rent, we'll do that. But we have to have some certainty that we can make those basic payments for some of those centers that aren't very structured very well, that can't sustain that. So that's really what's going to be happening.
Diversify, looking for certainty, looking for certainty. I have a question or a comment coming here. She looks armed.
So what's your input when it comes to a major hotel convention facility that is gaining the revenue for hotel rooms and can give the space away for free?
Yeah, well, it really, you know, in Washington, we have large hotels in the city that clearly play in that arena, but we don't have, other than our convention center. You know, a lot of people think, and Gaylord sells itself as being in Washington, but it's not, and that's the only other option, whereas it fits into that mold. So, you know, it's a slippery slope from our perspective, because we just don't, you know, the model is so different here. You know, I think that, you know, the team here, and Melissa Riley is our director of sales, and she's here, they look at every piece of business. Thanks, Melissa. They look at every piece of business because we want it all. And as a bureau, you know, the goal is to treat every piece of business, even that customer that says, I want the building for free and I want to pay $150 rates in April. Not a snowball's chance in hell. However, let's look at other options, whereas perhaps we can offer the customer what they want and see whether or not, because you're always going to be selling. So, you know, the reality is, in Washington, we don't have, other than some of the large box hotels, it's a different model with us just having our convention center. And when we're talking to the convention center, we share with them, you know, this is the rent that the customer, or the rent that they haven't paid or don't intend to pay, and this is the economic impact. So we try to collaborate, and I think a comment was made earlier in terms of the synergy between both organizations. You know, Linda and our team talk regularly, because the building is always going to look at what and how can we make direct revenue from this piece of business. And it's our job to also sell our building on why this piece of business is good for the city as a whole, and they get it.
And actually, to the point about a hotel, actually the model is a little more simple, because in a hotel, you're not weighing the economic impact for the city. And now, you know, a lot of these hotels are owned by individual investors and not owned by these large hotel companies anymore. So they're very much focused on that short-term P&L. So their decision is a cost-benefit analysis right off the bat as to whether it makes sense if they're going to drive more traffic and have to give away their space. So, you know, unfortunately, we try to take the city's perspective, I shouldn't say unfortunately, but the reality is from the building's perspective, we try to weigh collectively what the impact would be for the city, not just the pure economics of the building.
So here's what I'm hearing. We have to do business differently. The way things used to work may not work today, probably won't work today, and probably won't work tomorrow. So we have to constantly be reinventing ourselves. So have a discussion at your table about, what are you doing now to do business differently? Or are you doing anything now to do business differently? Talk about that at your table for a few minutes.
So, of course, national trend is Because I wanted to let you know that the college supposed to be a fashion for experience. I thought it was all part of the. I've been out that way all day. National Park. Yes, you're going to benefit from those $5 million economic value. Rocky, we're going to shot with you and Elliot. Let's fake something. All right. Right. Because restaurants are like, I've never seen that before. Are people low and you go to your revenue? No. Not a good model.
Boy, that photographer really sucks. I like it when it flashes like 5 or 6 times.
Okay, let's talk about this as a group. Who has something at their table they're willing to share with all of us? Looking for somebody to speak? Okay, coming that way.
Eric? I think your question was, what will we do different?
How are you doing business differently?
Well, I tell you, the one thing that Johnny and I were talking about was with all of the constraints that were being put on, and I'm with the convention center and my bureau partner's here and she can attest to some of the questions I fire at her when she approaches me with some of these groups. We do have to think outside the box, but the biggest thing that I've tried to employ with my bureau counterparts is education, first and foremost. It's my opinion, you can't sell what you don't know. And it's one thing to say we've got this gorgeous convention center, but if you don't know how it operates and what its push buttons are, it's real hard to go into a negotiation with a customer because we depend on them to bring the customers to us. For us, it's been an education process between me and my counterparts at the Bureau and even the hotel GMs and DOSs that, you know, and I'm not going to name names, but it's great to have national so-and-so coming in town in August when we're totally empty and they flash an economic impact of, you know, $20 million at us. But guess what? For the convention center, we make absolutely nothing because we're giving them free rent for the good of the community. They don't have any exhibits, so there's no ancillary cost, no ancillary revenues, and there's no F&B because they don't do banquets. It's all cash sales. So basically, we roll the dice in the summer to keep all the hotels busy and keep all the, you know, everybody else employed. So it's an education process. So when the salesperson comes and says, "Hey, I got a great piece of business," okay, hold up. Let's talk about it first.
Can you attest to this? Is this common?
Absolutely. And it happens. And to Eric's point, he and I, along with the rest of my team in Tampa, I mean, I get to see Eric several times a year coming up here, and I always like literally pounce on him. I'm like, okay, so seriously, you tell me why was this not a good business? And you know, looking at the answers, looking at this, you know, what has changed? And that's actually what Eric and I talked about yesterday. What has changed in the past 6 months, and I'm not aware of being based up here, of now why are our vendors, why is it not as flexible anymore? And so to get a better understanding, and Eric is an amazing communicator in regards to that, but at the end of the day, it goes back to, is it a good piece of business? Because sure, in August, you know, Eric has implemented an amazing program for our city to book a variety of pieces of business based on certain requirements, X, Y, and Z. But to get that piece of business in January, Vince points, we love you, but not so much.
Senator Washington will take it.
You sure you want it? I didn't take it. Maybe we'll try. I'm with you, yeah. I'm with you on that.
So I hear this going on in this partnership between the city and the centers, the venues. There really needs to be some great communication. Communication before they bring a client to you, saying this is possibly I'm going to bring to you. What do I not know? What's changed in the past 6 months? I thought that was a great question. What's changed in the past 6 months? And the education piece. I can tell you as a planner, I'm sitting here going, wow, I'm glad I don't feel your pain.
But I'll say one thing about what the scenario that was just articulated. You know, and we've come a long way, and I'll be honest with you, you know, when you talk about convention bureaus and convention centers, we have to be chameleons. You know, the way we do business on Monday may not be the way we look at a piece of business on Friday because, you know, sequestration and everything else. And I got that term from a hotel once when we were in a battle about rates. And I said, why are you guys so bullheaded? And I said, well, you know, they said, Elliot, we're, you know, just look at us as chameleons. And a light just went off. I'm like, you're absolutely right. And that's the way we have to do business as well. So even with our relationship with the convention center, you know, I could take this back to my days in Atlanta when Denise Cole was at the Georgia World Congress Center. It was all about the direct revenue to the building, which totally get, and bureaus need to understand why that's important to the stakeholders. But you cannot forget the overall economic development, economic impact for the city, which, you know, arguably convention centers were built for that reason, for economic impact. And then the other thing is what percentage of the hotel tax, if there is, or restaurant tax or other taxes go directly to the convention center, realizing that there are other expenses that they have to cover, and make sure that you articulate how that impact, you know, like this, you may not be getting any rent, but you know, you have the probability of getting X amount of dollars in indirect revenue from the tax being generated by that piece of business over a need period. And that conversation has changed so significantly over the years with convention centers and convention bureaus. And then now our convention center, Greg and his team, there's a board meeting tomorrow, whereas their board now sees it from that perspective. Clearly there's still a need to have direct revenue to the building, but they also understand the overall economic impact.
So education is critical here, and it's ongoing. It's not just a one-time thing. I love what he said about being a chameleon. I think that's true for any industry right now. Be nimble, be the nimble chameleon. So we have just a few minutes. Gentlemen, any other trends you'd like to share with them?
Yeah, the only thing I would say, and I don't want to keep beating on this dead horse, but because of the market conditions, I think centers have definitely, we've seen centers start to repurpose their building either on a temporary basis. So that's something that we're doing different, not in the traditional market for what we're discussing here, but you know, we're seeing that a lot more. And if it's not the physical use of the building, there's certainly different avenues or revenues that we're chasing. You know, even for us, you know, where we still think we have a good core business, obviously with the nonprofits and the other market segments, we're going to look to actually acquire some shows. So probably on the consumer show side as well. And we're certainly looking for partnerships where we'll actually take risks. Now I recognize not every center can do that, but if we think we're capitalized well and we're going to get a return on investment, we'll do that. So I think we're not alone. There's certainly others that are starting to do that. So I think that's something that a lot of folks are doing differently.
Okay.
The only other thing I'd say is that, you know, we talked about shows getting smaller and other things that affect our industry. You know, I have a example, which I won't show the association, whereas when I moved here 11 years ago, customers said, happy that you're here, you're too small for us. And, you know, that's with the new building, which is now 10 years old, but still looks great. You know, with the downsizing of shows or exhibits getting smaller, the sales team then was positioned to look at all those shows that were on the list that they're too small, that we're too small, and then let's look at the opportunity to book them in the next few years. And because of that, and because of the relationship in which we built with the customer, not calling them when they've told us a million times that they're too small, but just looking at the other business, we were able to capitalize on some of those shows. So, you know, I hate the fact that some shows are getting smaller, but, you know, let's face it, everyone capitalizes on something else. You know, there's always a bottom feeder or however you want to look at it, and sometimes we're looking for that carnage and we are going to be successful. So don't, you know, that's the chameleon-like approach in terms of, you know, always looking at things from a different perspective and how do you benefit from some of the changes in our industry.
Great. Any questions for them?
I have one.
I just want to get your perspective on what's really happening with the government. I know that's a raw question, but it's kind of like you know, I was watching this medical show where they said, well, if you don't want to get cancer, don't eat processed food, don't eat red meat, don't eat chicken, don't eat, you know, all these things. Besides putting honey on that tree over there and eating it, you know, it's bound to happen. Because you're in D.C. and your pulse with the government, I mean, government's really not going to shut down. It's really not going to do this. What do you really think from the extreme of the worst case scenario to the best case scenario of how this is really going to impact over the next 12 months?
So you think because we're here we might know any better?
Well, obviously, that's what he's saying.
That's what he's saying. Well, we'll act like it just because. No, I think, you know, the one thing I do hope, and I say this to anyone who will listen, what I hope we don't do is a self-fulfilling prophecy, you know, on this, is that we actually, the sky is falling and then no one does come, we don't have meetings and we're affected. I think it's too early to tell what the end result will be, and regardless of what the politicians decide. I think it is real that there will be some impact, you know, for particularly the travel for folks who can or cannot travel within agencies. I think Karen mentioned that, which is very true. So I think even in the short term, we'll start to see some of that. And for those who have shifted their markets to, you know, from corporate or whatever to government, there is going to be an impact. And I think Elliot has spoken to this already, that fortunately for our venue as a convention center, we don't do a lot of that, but certainly the hotels do. So we may see some attendance, but in the short term, I think we'll see some cutback in travel, but it's too early to tell, and I'm telling everybody in the world that it's too early to tell.
Right. And I think, you know, from our perspective, lesson learned here, people tend to think that government is recession-proof, government is, you know, meetings-proof. We've learned a lot in the last few years in terms of, you know, what the government will or will not do through words, and you know, don't travel to this destination and sequestration and everything else. And it's hard to say. So I'm just going to wait for the new pope to. No, yeah, but you know, it's hard. It's hard to really answer that without, you know, it's just speculating. We're just speculating at this point. So
let's give these two gentlemen.